This is the podcast that we ask our guests from in front and behind the camera, how did they get their foot in the door? What was the key to unlocking their success? What's their story?
A writer-director known for iconic blockbusters such as Resident Evil, Alien vs Predator, Mortal Kombat, Death Race, and my personal favourite, Event Horizon. We chat about the lost version of the cult classic Event Horizon, being told that Jude Law would never be a star after starring in 1994 film Shopping, why you should never give up on your dreams, and how it took 3 years to get his latest film starring Milla Jovovich and Bautista in the Lost Lands in front of the camera. Our guest today is writer-director Paul W.S. Anderson.
In your career, you've really become the guy that creates worlds. Not just like I can look back and think of, so many movies that you've done, whether it be written or you've directed or you've done both to them, but they're always kind of world building. Do you know what I mean? It's a fantastical world, or it's a sci-fi world, or it's these things. It must be so fun to have that. Each time you do a film, it's like a new toolbox. You've got all these new toys, all these new like surroundings, these monsters. Is that something that you've always been fascinated in, like when you were a child growing up? Fantasy, sci-fi, all these things.
Oh, well, firstly, I kind of realized recently that I've never really made a movie set in the modern world. The closest is probably Shopping, but that was in a kind of hyper stylized version of the real world, so much so that it was kind of pretty much completely rejected by the British press at the time. Because they didn't really understand why it looked that way and why it had all these young people who were good looking running around, and this isn't cinema. Jude Law is too good looking to be an actor, all of that stuff all of those brickbats we got thrown our way at the time. Pretty much everything else from Mortal Kombat after that onwards, it has been kind of world creation. They've been fantasy, science fiction, or kind of altered realities of the present day, or period pieces, which again, you have to create everything. I've never done a movie never done something like a Jason Bourne film where people have a fight in a car park and then get in a car and have a conversation. That for some reason, I've never done that. And I think it's partly because I do really enjoy the world building aspect of movies. When I was a kid, I used to play a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, and I was always the dungeon master. So I was kind of like, I was always the one that made up the stories, made up the worlds. And I feel like, you can draw a direct line between that and what I do now. The only difference is I get paid to be the dungeon master.
Yeah, higher stakes as well, much higher stakes. Well, how did that translate, being interested in Dungeons and Dragons, and then how did you go into film? How did you become like interested in writing scripts? And because I guess Shopping, correct me if I'm wrong, but that was like the first script that you wrote and directed.
It was the first movie script that I wrote and directed. I had done television before that. I did an award-winning documentary called The Spiral Cage that I wrote and directed, that was based on a graphic novel. And then after that, I did a TV drama called Speed that everyone thought was a terrible title. So why don't you change that? It's a stupid title. It doesn't make any sense. It was about a car thief. And then, I didn't change it. And then a year later, Speed came out with Keanu Reeves. And I'm like, look, see, it's not a stupid title at all. So I'd done TV work before I did Shopping. So I'd kind of like, I'd started with shorter formats, like half an hour stuff. And then, Shopping was definitely my first feature length endeavor. And I'd also written stuff as well for TV. I'd done a Granada TV show called El Cid, where I was one of the principal writers on that, where I was kind of fresh out of university. I hadn't, still living in student accommodation. And for a long time, that was the richest I ever was, because I was living in my student digs still, but I was making like TV writer money, and it was great. So it was beers all round, beers for everybody.
What a great combo.
And then I became a film director, and I spent all of the money that I'd kind of like made as a writer, because when we did Shopping, I wrote and directed it, but part of the deal I did because I was a young writer director, and everyone would have rather given it to a more experienced director. I'm like, okay, I'll direct it for free, essentially, and you just give me like minimum wage on the script. So I didn't make very much, and again, it was like a long process to raise the money for it. And then the money I did make, we saw a rough cut of the movie, and it became obvious we needed a punchier opening. So the small amount of money I had, I paid for the helicopter shots at the beginning of the film, which were great. I'm glad I did it because they really became like a signature of the movie and like a statement of intent that we wanted to make a cinematic work here. So I kind of said, it's okay, I'll pay for that and I'll defer it. And if the movie ever makes any money, you can pay me back. So since then, the company that made the movie went bankrupt, and I'm sure it's made a lot of money, but I've never seen a dime yet. I'm still waiting for my deferment. And the funny thing is, I've actually seen that footage turn up in other people's movies as well. So somebody's selling it as kind of stock footage. Like, yeah, the opening shot, or one of the opening shots of Moon.
Wow.
That movie is some of the helicopter stuff I shot from Shopping.
Wow, you must have been watching that. Like, hang on a minute.
I remember that. Yeah, because
wow,
I do vividly remember it because it was the first. Because I was up there with the cameraman shooting it. Because I'm like, well, I'm paying for it. I want to go up in a helicopter because I'd never been in a helicopter before, and we had the door open and the cameraman's leaning out, and I'm leaning out past him, looking at the monitor. And we're going around these big industrial towers that are like jetting flame into the air. And I realized what I was doing, like leaning out of a helicopter without a strap or anything. I'm like, oh God, this is dangerous.
Well, I love that opening scene of that movie. The music really makes it. And I
the
feel
Sabres of Paradise.
Yeah. And
Paul Oakenfold.
I feel like a lot of your movies have got great music. Like really punchy, like you're like, yes. And I think of like the Mortal Kombat as well. That's got a great theme, which has kind of become quite iconic now as well. And even with Event Horizon as well, that's another one where the music's so haunting, but it's all very memorable.
The thing that runs between all three of those movies, of course, is Orbital, because they feature on all three of those soundtracks.
Yeah.
Because we used that track Halcyon On and On in Shopping, and I loved it so much we used it in Mortal Kombat, and then I wanted to bring the Hartnett brothers in to basically score Event Horizon and do like a completely kind of fresh, kind of techno-y kind of take on the soundtrack album. But the studio was very nervous about it, so they made us work with a more traditional composer, Michael Kamen. But then I kind of mashed the two of them together, and I think we ended up with something amazing because it kind of raised the stakes, and I thought was the best thing Kamen had done in years. And the same with Orbital, it was really something very distinctive, the merging of these two different styles. But music is something I've always been very, very involved in. From Shopping onwards, really, because while I was kind of growing up and, being a young teenage wannabe filmmaker or early 20s, I would see all of these American movies, specifically the movies made by John Hughes, like Pretty in Pink, The Breakfast Club, St. Elmo's Fire, those kind of films that specifically sold the films based on music. It was a real sales tool at that point in the film industry. And nearly all of the music was British music. It was British bands, but they were being used by American studios and American filmmakers. And I'm like, why does no one in the UK do this? We were still stuck in kind of very much film as art. It had to be a movie about a sexually repressed butler in the 1920s. Otherwise you couldn't, or it had to be My Beautiful Laundrette or something like that, which is a great film, but it's a very specific kind of film. And it wasn't the kind of film I wanted to make. I wanted to make one of these kind of youth movies. So when we were putting Shopping together, which wasn't easy because, there was no real history of British youth filmmaking, movies made by young people for young people. That really didn't exist. And Shopping really kind of broke the barrier a little bit, and a lot of movies followed straight after, like Shallow Grave, Trainspotting.
Yeah, of
All
course.
of those films came immediately after Shopping, and when we were trying to piece it together, we would use anything that financially would help us. A little bit of money from Japan, a little bit of money from Germany, a little bit of money from Italy. But the UK was always, it was where it was set, and that was the hardest place to raise money. So I actually put together a soundtrack album with London Records. So we put together the soundtrack album before we even made the movie. And I went, this is a sales tool that we will use to sell the film. People went, okay, this is an interesting idea. Not my idea, John Hughes had been doing it for a decade almost.
Yeah.
But, the idea to package up British bands and put them on a British soundtrack album. So that ended up being quite a big soundtrack album. And then I did the same with Mortal Kombat, where, because I'd been based in London. When I did Mortal, I moved to LA. But, techno and house music was very, very big in Europe, but hadn't really transferred to America yet. So I was into all these bands like Orbital that the American studios just weren't interested in. And I'm like, no, so I pushed a lot of that music into the movie. And the studio, I think, wasn't really happy about it, but it was cheap. So they appreciated it. And it went well with the imagery. It gave the movie a lot of energy.
Yeah.
And then the soundtrack album for Mortal Kombat, where I pretty much chose every single track on it, went platinum. And that was a big deal. They were like,
wait a minute.
Yeah. And then they did another album called More Mortal Kombat. That was tracks that we'd auditioned for the movie but hadn't actually used in the film. And I think that went platinum as well. So I got a couple of platinum albums at home. That's all I ever got.
Crazy.
I put the album together, but I never got a dime out of it.
Oh, God.
I got a platinum album for the wall.
I hope you've been paid at some point. It sounds like a lot of times there was money to be made and you missed out.
Listen, I'm not complaining.
Really punchy soundtracks, and I'm just wondering as well, from how do you go from Shopping, which I presume is relatively low budget in comparison to something like Mortal Kombat?
It was apples. It's a bit apples and oranges in that you go, oh, well, Shopping's very low budget and Mortal Kombat's all over the place. So on the surface, it's apples and oranges, but it was kind of apples and apples because, yes, Shopping was a very low budget film, and we did it for a traditional British art house budget that most people would do a kitchen sink drama for, or some people talking in a car, down the pub. But we had car chasers and helicopters and action scenes, and so we crammed a lot in, and a big soundtrack and a big feel to it. And that's what appealed to American studios. Was the movie didn't go down particularly well in the UK. Some of the cooler magazines like The Face and ID, they loved the movie. But the kind of mainstream press, the tabloids and the broadsheets just hated it. And as did our distributor, actually, Rank Film. Don't know if you remember Rank. It was a guy with a gong. They were a big British distributor back in the day. And they hated the movie so much. They said that we had dishonored the Rank name. And they refused to put the guy with the gong on the front of it, because we were kind of sullying their name. And when your distributor hates the movie, you go, oh, it's not going to do that well. So actually, the movie was playing at the Sundance Film Festival, and I was in Sundance on the same week that it released in the UK, and it got all these toxic reviews. And but in America, the studio people really loved it because it was, it looked like I really knew how to make something big out of something small. And Mortal Kombat, by studio standards, was something small. It was only a $20 million budget, which, and Waterworld had just been made. So that was the first $100 million budget. So we were kind of, for what we wanted to do, it was visual effects, it was foreign locations, We had to pay Christophe Lambert quite a bit of money. It was a lot. So they thought, this guy, he knows how to squeeze something out of a dollar. So it kind of made sense from a studio point of view to kind of take a risk on me. And also, I did my research. I knew that I was a hard sell for it because of my lack of experience. So I basically went and I read up on visual effects, like every single book I could get on visual effects and matte painting and CG. And so I knew all the buzzwords in theory. I mean, I knew nothing about it because I'd never done visual effects.
I don't know if you can hear that. Sorry, 1 second. He's
nice.
Just gowing his head off. Sorry, carry on.
So, so I knew nothing about visual effects other than what I kind of researched. And I went into all these pitch meetings, CG this, background that, rotoscope this. And everyone's like, well, this guy knows what he's talking about. And I got the job. And then I went, oh my God. And now I have to deliver. And I know nothing about this shit. So I actually ended up going into all the visual effects houses and working with the animators so that I could get up to speed with what I claimed I knew all about. And I actually discovered how few filmmakers do that. Directors quite often don't go into the visual effects houses. They just get sent stuff. They don't work with the individual animators. And I think that's a shame. I did it out of fear because I thought, oh God, I better learn this craft that I claim I know. Mm. But in the end, I ended up falling in love with it. And it's really an extension of the filmmaking process. If you think when you shoot a movie, you have a shooting crew of maybe 150 people on set every day. And your job as a director is turn up early, motivate everybody, get everyone to deliver their best work. Then on Wrap, you say goodbye to that 150 people. Mm-hmm. But actually a whole new team starts. And there's probably like 150, 200, 250 animators working on your movie. Mm. And I feel like my job as a director is to then engage with them as well and get them to deliver their best work, give them what guidance I can, because there's kind of two movies you make. There's the one you shoot and there's the one you do post-production on. Mm. And you've got to deliver both exceptionally well for your movie to turn out well.
That's the thing, isn't it? The directing, you're like the captain of the ship. And I suppose going from, a smaller budget to a bigger budget, it must just be a bigger ship with more crew.
It definitely was. But like I said, the fact that, Mortal Kombat was not, the movies that came out just before us was like True Lies, it wasn't like one of these vast movies. It was complicated and it was definitely a big step up. I went from a $3 million budget to a $20 million budget. So, but I was a very technically oriented director. So I relished the challenge in a way. And the fact that, we were doing everything in a Hollywood low budget way really helped. And it was funny because when we were doing shopping, we'd have discussions about, we can't afford any extras. So we did a market scene in shopping where Jason Isaacs is this market trader and he's talking to Jude Law and they're negotiating and they're supposed to be in a crowded market. And I'm like, wow, we should have a couple of hundred extras in the market. And my producing partner said, well, we've got money for 3.
Oh no!
Like 300. He said, no, 3. So I'm like, oh my God, what are we going to do? So I end up shooting the whole scene on really, really long lenses so that it's a very compressed frame. And then you have the same 3 people going backwards and forwards, changing hats, putting a new jacket on. And I thought when I was shooting it, it's like, okay, when I get to Hollywood, I won't have to put up with this kind of shit. I'm going to get 100 extras. Sure enough, on every movie I've done since, there's been exactly the same discussion. It's like, do you really need that many extras? Do you really need a crane? Could you use a stepladder instead? It's still exactly the same discussions because every movie, the budget might go up, but then the scope of the work you want to do and the vision you have also increases. So you're still trying to, you're still trying to kind of like cram as much in as possible with, with a fairly limited basket of resources.
I feel like as well that films seem to be getting shot in less time now as well. So it's like people used to go away and shoot for months and months and months, and sometimes now you hear low budget films being shot in like 12 days, and it's just crazy. So
Oh,
I can imagine.
I was in New Mexico recently, and I was in a car, and I was talking to the guy who was driving me, and the last movie he was on, they shot in a week.
Wow. Yeah, it's just
You know,
mad.
so shooting a feature film in a week, there's more shot that way than you would imagine.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
crazy.
no, it has become tougher and tougher. And for some movies, it's become tougher and tougher. You know, there's still the mega tentpole. We're going to spend $350 million on this film. Obviously, they can shoot forever.
Mm,
But then the other end of the spectrum is, the independent films where, the budgets, I feel like, have been constantly coming down for years. And
mm.
everyone still wants the same. They still want names. They still want action. They still want spectacle. But can you do it for half the price? And, as filmmakers, we've had to become smarter and smarter to deliver that.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. I mean, the industry must have changed a lot since you started, and to talk about shopping and looking at the other, there's moments in that because I rewatched a lot of your work before chatting to you today because I just enjoy a lot of your movies. But rewatched Shopping and I also rewatched Death Race, and I was like, oh, I can see having watched them back to back, I can see the evolution. I'm like, oh, there's elements of Shopping that I'm like, oh, you definitely kind of, there's parts of that film, Death
Yeah,
Race.
I loved shooting Death Race because it really was a return to shopping,
Mm.
But this time I did have a bigger budget, and it was beautiful because it was the same. It was finding beauty in industrial decay,
Mm.
which I grew up with a lot. Growing up in the north of England, when I did, it was the north of England was known for kind of heavy industry, iron and steel and shipbuilding, but
Mm.
all those industries were in decline or closing down. So you had a lot of big industrial derelict buildings,
Mm.
which I, would wander around in and kind of, there's a beauty to those buildings, or I find there's a beauty to them. And that's what we exploited when we did Shopping, which we shot in the East End of London in all the derelict flour warehouse, derelict loading docks, derelict dog food factory was the best one. There's an action scene in Shopping. If you've just seen it recently, you probably remember it, where Sean Pertwee turns up and they push Jude Law's caravan into the water, and then they chase him and Sadie Frost. And they run through this fabulous room that's full of all these rusting steel pillars.
Mm.
Great texture. And we laid all this dolly track. It's a very dirty floor. We lay the dolly track on the floor. And we're doing this. They're running and running, and we're tracking with them. And we're going so fast because, Jude and Sean were young men back then. They could run really quickly. So the guys pushing the dolly are trying to go really, really fast. And the dolly just goes off the end of the dolly track because they overshoot. And dollies are pretty heavy. And it breaks. What we discovered was it wasn't kind of a dirt floor. It was actually, there was a hard crust about that thick. And the dolly broke through it. And underneath it was all this liquid bird shit that pigeons and seagulls had been eating all of this dog food from the derelict dog food factory.
Wow.
And then it was kind of dog food flavored pigeon shit. So it stank so bad. It's like the ultimate combination.
Woke up the
And
smoke.
my poor camera operator, he went flying into all this. He's covered in shit. And he was furious. And he came up to me and he said, "Paul, you've shot this whole movie in shit," and stormed off. And we didn't see him for half a day.
Oh my God.
He was pretty pissed.
That's brilliant.
When I shot Death Race, it kind of, there's derelict industrial places. Again, it was another industrial dockside that we took over to shoot the majority of the movie. I really enjoyed doing that.
Was that also shot in England? Death Race.
No, we shot in Montreal.
Oh, okay.
There was a big area of the, Montreal, again, in a similar way, had a lot of heavy industry that was closing down. So there was a massive, big warehouse space where they used to construct trains.
Mm,
So there were all these long factory buildings that had train tracks in them. And
mm.
that's what we used for the kind of like when the cars are racing inside. It was all this derelict train factory that was also being used for storing paper, waste paper.
Oh,
And 6 months after we shot, I was thinking, when people see how good this movie looks, they're going to be all over this location.
mm,
But 6 months after we shot, the whole thing burnt down because the
mm.
waste paper somehow caught fire. And it got so insanely hot that the metal beams melted of the buildings. The whole thing burnt down.
Wow,
So
that's
that's really a kind of like a bit like shopping because all those buildings got torn down after shopping as
mm,
well. I mean, you can still see some hints of them in the kind of rejuvenated docklands. They kept some of the cranes, but it doesn't look as cool as it did with all the peeling paintwork.
wow.
But
It's like a
Death Race
screenshot.
and Shopping, I think, captured the industrial dereliction side of those two cities, London and Montreal, really well. And it is like a time capsule because those
Yeah.
locations don't really exist anymore.
I have to ask, I'm a huge fan of Event Horizon, and it is a film that there's a lot of speculation, a lot of rumors. Is there any truth in the fact that there's another cut out there?
There was quite a bit of footage that we didn't use in the original cut of the movie, the theatrical cut.
Mm,
We had a pretty hectic post production on Event Horizon because Paramount were producing Titanic at the same time. And Paramount had intended to release Titanic in the summertime in August.
mm,
And then Cameron told them the movie wouldn't be ready. They were pushing till Christmas. So suddenly they had this open slot and they went, right, you're releasing your movie in August. And I'm like, well, that's not very far away. But, in my youth and my naivety and just my general enthusiasm at the time, we said, well, I can go for it. So we did. So the first cut of the movie that we showed to the studio, which is also the first time they tested the movie. So the first time anyone from the studio saw the film
mm.
was in front of a live audience. And that was really 3 weeks after we'd finished shooting. So the cut was in very, very rough shape. And, you learn through experience and, knowing now what I know, I would never have done that. I would have said, no, you guys, let's just wait. I need a full 10 weeks as mandated by the Directors Guild of America. I need 10 weeks to cut the movie, but I cut it in 3. We put it in front of an audience. The audience, they were clearly terrified at times, but unsatisfied as well because the movie was too long because I hadn't had time to kind of shrink it down. So then we started editing frantically so that we could test again. And I think, the pendulum probably swung too far the other way and we cut too tightly. And we cut out some things that I regret that I wish had stayed in the movie.
Mm.
But in the end, we ended up with a fairly good test result. And that's the version of the movie we released. And, that's the version of the movie that people love. And it's become like a cult classic and done terribly well over time. So I can't say I regret, that cut of the film, but there is a different cut of the movie that you could do for sure, and the footage exists for that. But I'm not quite sure how much of it does still exist because I might have shot it, but there's no guarantee the studio kept it. Because this was when we made Event Horizon, it was 97 and it was pre-DVD. It was right before the DVD revolution. And of course, when DVD came out, suddenly, having all these extras, deleted scenes, director's commentary, this was all really important stuff to have and keep. But at the time we did Event Horizon, there was no reason to keep it because there was no market for it. So a lot of it, went into storage. Some of it we found over the years, but like on a VHS tape, there's some scenes it's not the original film quality. So there is footage out there, but I think to do a proper restored cut it requires a little bit more than just editing. You'd need to do some more visual effects. You need to probably spend a little bit of money on it.
I hope one day that, because I just want to see more of that film, because that film's so atmospheric. It's so, the closest thing I can think of really, it's like Alien on steroids. It's that film terrified me when I first saw it. And rewatching it last week, I was still like, holy shit. Like,
It's funny you mention Alien on steroids because I was sitting in a studio meeting before we'd shot the movie, and one of the people working in the studio, one of the studio executives said, "You know, the great thing about this, it's like Alien, but in space." And we're all sitting there going, "Who's going to say? Is anyone going to say that Alien actually was in space?" Or, and of course, we didn't say anything because we wanted the money to go make the movie, so we just kept our mouths shut.
You're like,
But
yes.
it's like Alien, but in space. It's like, yeah, that's a good point.
I love that.
Now for a quick break. We'll be back to the episode shortly. If you enjoyed this episode and want to support us, get early access and exclusive content and episodes, click to join our YouTube channel and become a member now. Please leave us a positive rating. Add us on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok at Lifeinfilmpod. Essentially, please like and subscribe everything. It makes a huge difference. Thank you. This podcast is sponsored by Betterhelp. Do you work in the film industry? Are you freelance? Or perhaps you have a 9-to-5? No matter what you do, mental health affects us all. I struggled early on in my career with the uncertainty of if and when I would ever work again, struggling to pay my bills or simply with anxiety. Don't know about you, but being an actor, it's very important for me to maintain structure in the downtimes, and I found not only exercise, but talking to someone for me was a game changer. And so Life in Film has partnered with Betterhelp to provide you with access to the largest online therapy service in the world. And it can all be done from the comfort of your own home, from a phone, tablet or laptop. No commute, cutting down travel costs, and most importantly, it's affordable. With over 1,000 therapists in the UK, Betterhelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a wide variety of expertise in mental health. If you need someone to talk to and you're thinking of giving therapy a go, BetterHelp is a great option. And being a listener of the podcast, you get 10% off. That's 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/lifeinfilm. That's betterhelp.com/lifeinfilm. And back to the show.
Well, Lost Lands was a pretty long, tortuous, elaborate, and exciting journey to the screen. Originally, Milla brought me into the project, actually. She was the huge George R.R. Martin fan. She'd read all of his books. And she was approached by a German producer and writer called Konstantin Werner, who had the rights to In the Lost Lands. And Milla said, you should take a look at this. So I kind of met with Konstantin, and we developed a screenplay together. And we went through a long process. It was about 3.5 years. Because the first hurdle that Konstantin and I had to get over was Milla. Because we'd finish a draft of the screenplay, we'd give it to her, she'd give her notes on it, she'd clip us over the back of the head with it, go, do better. And then finally, when we got a draft that she was happy with, we would send it to George and he would give his notes. So everyone was very, very involved in the development process. And also we were making other films as well. So it was a fairly long script development process. And then once we had a script we liked, I started thinking about how I wanted to shoot the movie. Mm-hmm. And you've seen the film. It really is what George wrote, which is a kind of elaborate adult fairy tale. Mm-hmm. He wrote a kind of original kind of Brothers Grimm or Hans Christian Andersen style fairy tale where the Little Mermaid dies at the end. Or, Cinderella where toes get chopped off. There's a darkness to George's work, obviously. But also it had this kind of fairy tale moral, be careful what you wish for. And I wanted a visual that would kind of match that kind of fairy tale aesthetic. And I felt like that I wasn't going to get that by just going out and shooting in the usual derelict cement factory or kind of forest in Ireland. So we developed the idea of shooting everything on a soundstage with these virtual environments that we actually built before we shot anything. And the advantage of that was that the actors actually got to see the environments they were in. So anything they interacted with, the close to them or in the medium foreground, that was all built. But all the deep background was generated in a computer, which is why we have these amazing kind of unearthly landscapes. Mm-hmm. And And that can be quite disconcerting for an actor. I mean, both Milla and Dave are very experienced, acting on against a blue screen to a tennis ball, and eventually that'll become something. But, I think people's performance is much more difficult when you put them in that position. This time, Milla and Dave could see the environments they were in. If it was a huge, big oil field where the pillars of oil were burning, shooting hundreds of feet into the sky. Now, I can describe that, and an actor can understand what it is. But then you actually show, like I showed Dave, what he looked like in that landscape, and he went, "Oh, I've got it now." And actually being within that landscape kind of really changed his performance.
It's got to be a much more interesting shoot as well for everyone involved if you can see, a lot of what.
Well, it definitely helps because we had real-time compositing and playback, so that you could see as we were shooting. I had two monitors, one with a green screen on it, and one with the actors actually in the environment, and they could see that. It was also very helpful for the camera operators, because rather than using their best guess as to where the giant windmill was behind Dave, you could actually see it in the environment. And it also, because we were working in the Unreal Engine, which is a video game engine and is very good real time, really fast, we could actually alter things on the fly on the day. So if the director of photography was saying, I want it more backlit, I want Dave to be more silhouette-y, we could alter that in the background and move the sun to 10 degrees above the horizon line. And if we liked the look of that, then the director of photography would move his light 10 degrees above the studio floor, and the background and the foreground would kind of match together. So it was a very, it was a great way of working, and very creative. But it was very time consuming, which comes back to, how does a movie like this come about? After the 3.5 years of script development, we then spent a year building all these backgrounds before we ended up shooting a frame of film.
Wow. It just shows you, doesn't it? I mean, is that a new way of shooting for you? Have you done that mixture?
I've never shot like that before. No one's ever shot like that. It was,
I was going to say, it sounds unique.
It was a whole new way of shooting, so we were on the cutting edge. Sometimes it was the bleeding edge because of technology, because it kind of took a while. And they were literally writing code for the computers the day before we started principal photography. Because the way it worked was each one of the real film cameras had a secondary camera slaved to it, which was pointing upwards and looking at the studio ceiling. And we had a series of kind of 450 stars on the studio ceiling, little bright points of light. And it was like how kind of old-time sailors navigated by the stars, is if that camera that was pointed upwards that fed its information into an onboard computer, if it could see 35 stars, it knew where it was in space. And that meant that we could slave the real-time camera to the virtual camera, so that when somebody panned to the left 10 degrees, the virtual camera would also pan to the left 10 degrees. If you moved forward, the virtual camera would move forward. So it was a very intricate way of working, and we had to develop it all specifically for the film. But now that we've broken the back of the technology, it's definitely something I would like to explore more.
Oh, that's amazing! You've done a full James Cameron there. You've literally invented the thing that you wanted. So you did it, and now you can go on and do other films, and it's a bit easier.
Well, yeah, and now I realize why he only makes a movie once every 10 years.
Yeah,
I think the next thing I do will be less high tech.
yeah.
It was amazing to do it, because the movie I did before, Monster Hunter, I think we only went onto a soundstage for like 1 or 2 days. Everything else was on location in these insane remote locations in South Africa and Namibia, with the crew living in tents, and everyone was roughing it. But that was a complete old school on location shoot. And I felt, having pushed the envelope as far as I could in that direction, the idea of then going within a soundstage and now creating all the environments myself was something that really, really appealed.
Was it all within one soundstage? Was it all within one location, or did you go off to other places?
No, it was one studio complex in Krakow in Poland.
That's going to be nice.
It was great.
Yeah.
After a while, it reminded me a little bit of Event Horizon, where people got cabin fever a little bit because they never would get we just weren't going outside
Yeah.
because that was a very set driven movie. So that's a slight disadvantage. Going on location always gives you the energy of the location.
Mhm.
And also it kind of visually it leads you. Location suggests certain things, certain lighting looks good, certain framing automatically looks good on a location. If you're creating everything digitally,
Mhm.
the world is your oyster. You can do anything you want, which is both creatively liberating, but also creatively terrifying
Mhm.
because there are no boundaries and you have to decide everything.
It must be, yeah, it must be very daunting because it's open. You can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
Um, but no, I mean, this film is visually stunning. And now that you've told me how it's done, I want to go back and watch it again and kind of just figure it out because I had no idea that's how it was done. It's very interesting.
The only thing we went outside for was we in the field. There was a
Mm,
field outside the studio, and we shot the horses galloping backwards and forwards. So
mm,
anytime you see a wide shot of a horse moving, that was done outside, and then those elements were dropped into digital environments. But otherwise, we never went outside, which was great because we shot in Poland in the middle of the winter, and you just didn't want to be outside. It was pretty unpleasant.
yeah, of course. I was going to ask you. Obviously, you've already said that Mila came to you with this script, so that question's out the window of how did she get involved? But in terms of Dave Bautista, I'm sure it's not a hard sell when you get to describe his character to him and be like, "This is going to be your part. You're essentially a space cowboy." I mean, how did he get involved? What was the process there, and how did that all come together?
Well, I love Dave for this because he's one of those few big physical actors who also has great emotional sensitivity.
Mm,
I think you can see obviously he's a big physical presence and he's great with action. But if you look at his performance in Blade Runner, for example, there's so much tenderness and regret and there's so much happening behind his eyes that I thought this is the guy for me because I also knew I wanted to kind of Lost Lands has a kind of Western feel to it as well. It's almost like a spaghetti Western
mm,
because it deals in a lot of spaghetti Western tropes. Two kind of heroes go off on a journey into a hostile landscape, but they don't necessarily trust one another. They betray one another, but they start to build feelings for one another as they go forward. That's the plot of For a Few Dollars More, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Two Meals for Sister Sarah. So I knew that there was a kind of Western element baked in, and I knew I wanted to go with that kind of Sergio Leone style of shooting where you alternate big close-ups with massive wide shots,
yeah.
with as little in between as possible. And I thought, I always had this image of Charles Bronson, um, who is one of my favorite movie stars,
Mm,
and also acting wise, very, very underrated in my opinion. But like his introduction in Once Upon a Time in the West, where the brim of the hat comes up and you see his eyes for the first time. And I thought, well, whose eyes are those going to be? And
yeah.
Dave, I thought those are the eyes you want to see because there's, like I said, there's so much depth and emotion and sensitivity in there, but in a package that is capable of great brutality and awesome feats of physical endeavor.
Mm. And I don't know if you've seen it, but the Last Showgirl, which David Bautista is obviously in as well, and that's coming out side by side with this, and you see the range there, like the performances are completely different, the roles are completely different. He really is. He's one of those actors that's come from wrestling, but now like people have completely, well, I've completely forgotten that. He's such a brilliant actor.
For me, what made me so happy, like I think the happiest day on the shoot was we started shooting the first 2 days, we shot action. So
Mm.
it was Dave's introduction in that underpass
Oh
with the
yeah, yeah.
two-headed snake and it's got pistols and he kills people and he's really cool and it's very spaghetti Western. I always knew that was going to be great, right?
Mm.
But then the third day of shooting was the first time Milla and Dave worked together. And it was just them sitting around a campfire talking about the sky and the way the colors are changing. And it was a very quiet scene and quite a long dialogue scene. And and that was amazing because that was even more exciting for me than all the action and the guns and the spaghetti westernness. Just seeing the chemistry between these two characters in the very quiet moments that exist in the movie, that's where I feel kind of Dave really came into his own and kind of showed us that range. It's, the last showgirl, but also the kind of action at the same time.
And Milla Jovovich as well. She's one of those actresses who I think of action, I think of things like that. But again, as you say, those quieter scenes, the more intimate scenes, it's just brilliant.
I felt the story already had a lot of what audiences are familiar with from George's work. It had these dark characters that hold secrets, surprising plot twists, and a kind of inherent darkness to it. Which I think that's great. And it's got all the creatures that you would expect from a George R.R. Martin work as well. So we wanted to keep that, but going forwards, kind of build it out so it still felt inherently like the things that we wrote were a creation of George. And the way we did that was we kind of looked at the rest of his work. And obviously the battle between church and state is something that's very important to George. And the way that, the two of them battle for control, both in their own kind of selfish ways, and the way that church is used as an agent for social control as well. So that was something that Konstantin Werner and I added to the short story that didn't exist, but it felt very organic to George's world. And then in terms of kind of building out the world visually as well, what I did was I took all of the visual design stuff I was doing as I was spending my year building all these environments, and I would run them past George. I would show them to him and get his comments on them and get him on board. So as well as reading the script, he also had a feeling of what the world would look and feel like, because I feel like when you make something called In the Lost Lands, you want the Lost Lands to be a character in the movie. And if it's going to be a character, you want it to kind of be approved by the guy who created it in the first place. Yeah. So we had a very long and collaborative process, and we added elements, but we added elements that we felt were organic and elements that he approved of.
Paul, this has been absolutely wicked. I'm a huge fan of all your work, and we haven't even got to talk about Alien vs Predator, Resident Evil, all these other films that I've just watched again. But we've run out of time, unfortunately. But it's been a real pleasure.
I'll have to come back, and then you'll have to change the background behind you.
Oh yeah, I'll do some of the other films. I wanted to fit all of them in here, but it was tricky. But for the last thing to ask you, do you have any advice for young filmmakers that are coming into the industry, perhaps writers, directors that are trying to get their foot in the door? What would be your advice?
Never give up. Don't give up. I mean, it's a funny industry because there's no way in, as a writer or as a director, as a producer. Yes, if you want to be like an assistant director or you want to work in the prop department, you can work your way up, become a PA. There's an apprenticeship, but to actually direct, I mean, it's a weird business to get into. And somebody said something to me very early on, which is because I wanted to be a writer, and they said, "Writers write," and what does that mean? It means you don't just because it's pretty obvious. Of course, writers write, but how many people have you met that want to be in the film industry that say they have a great idea for a movie and great idea, but they never write it? Lots of people. It's very few people that actually sit down and put the graft in, and that's that's what they say about success. 5% inspiration, 95% perspiration. It's like you gotta keep working at it. And for me, certainly, shopping wasn't the first script I wrote. I'd written lots of scripts beforehand. You write a script, it gets rejected. You write another script, it gets rejected. You write another script, it bursts into flames and gets rejected. You just gotta keep going. Try again, fail better. You gotta just keep pushing. And I passionately believe that if you push hard enough, you will succeed. But that's that's the thing that I think differentiates people who succeed and don't succeed quite a lot of the time is how much you push and how much persistence you have. Because it's a very discouraging industry as well. It's, get ready for disappointment because there's plenty of it. You've got to be able to deal with that. You've got to be able to deal with disappointment, deal with rejection. But if you can, and you can keep working and keep pushing, I do believe you will succeed. My mother was a nurse and my father was a merchant seaman. No relation to the film industry whatsoever. And I grew up in Newcastle upon Tyne. Nobody makes movies in Newcastle upon Tyne. I had no link to the film industry at all. But somehow, through pushing, I managed to get in. And that's what I would advise, is just never, ever give up. And don't get distracted either, by doing, I'm going to do something else for a few years and then I'll come back to my real passion. I'll just take this job in advertising and then I'll come back to filmmaking, or I'll just want to kind of make enough money to like get, put a down payment on a house, and then I'll really commit to my film career. Once you start doing that, the chances of you really achieving what you want to achieve are very diminished. The
time is now. Time is now.
The time is now, and it may not be now. It may be in 5 years' time. But if you don't push for the next 5 years, it ain't going to happen.
Yeah.
And that would be my advice. Like just really keep pushing and really believe in yourself and believe in your talents, because ultimately that's all you have is your own self-belief. Because I've seen it with plenty of my movies, like with shopping. Sitting at the Sundance Film Festival, reading all these terrible reviews that were coming in. Jude Law's too good looking to be an actor. Shopping is nothing more than a relentless orgy of destruction. These were critical things written in a critical way. But I'm like, how can you object to Jude Law?
Well, they were wrong,
he's good looking. Why is that bad? And do you know how much money we spent on the movie? Next to nothing. And we managed to produce a reckless orgy of destruction. Do you know how difficult that is? I actually love that quote so much. We ended up putting it on the UK poster.
I love that.
There's lots of negativity. But then the great thing about shopping is, and like Event Horizon and like a lot of the movies I've done, you cut to 15 years later, people reassess them. Go, that was a really cool movie, and that was an important movie. In the history of British cinema, that had its place, because without that, they wouldn't have been this. And, that's been really nice to see, but you've got to put your hard hat on and take a beating, at the time. The reassessment 15 years later is very nice, but, it doesn't take the pain away of the beating you take at the time, right? But you've got to get through that. And the only way you can do that is through self-belief.
I love that. I'm an actor and I'm a writer myself. So whenever I'm feeling like I might give up or, become an estate agent, I'm going to watch this clip and just remind myself, keep going, never give up. And that goes for everyone else.
Listen, there's no substitute, especially for writers. It's you get the torpedoes in the water. And the more torpedoes you have in the water, the more chance it's going to hit a ship, right? It's, if you've only got one project, you better hope it's amazing. And how many amazing projects also, if you're a student of film history, how many amazing projects still take 20 years to get made? You don't want to be waiting 20 years for your great script to be appreciated. So write something else, then write something else, then write a TV show, then write a stage play, then write a commercials jingle. It's whatever you can do to get your foot in the door and get some momentum behind you. That's another important thing, I think.
Amazing. Paul, thank you so much. I've taken way too much of your time, so I'll let you go now. But thank you so much. All the best with the film, man. I absolutely loved it, and this has been a real pleasure.
Thank you. Cheers.
If you enjoyed this episode and want to support us, get early access and exclusive content and episodes, click to join our YouTube channel and become a member now. Thank you to our guest Paul, and thank you to his team at Impact Pictures. As always, thank you to our sponsor, BetterHelp.